You're listening to channel F. At the very end of the 70s, my next guest and his bandmates migrated from Ottawa to Toronto. They found themselves right in the middle of a vibrant, burgeoning, and influential music scene along the Queen Street West Strip. Very quickly, they formed the band Breeding Ground. It's my pleasure to be speaking with Hugh Gladish, an old friend and co-founder of Breeding Ground, as well as lead guitarist. He'll talk about the ups and downs of being a fledgling band and how the Queen Street West music scene influenced their musical direction and in some ways their personal lives. Hugh spoke to me remotely from his home in Ottawa. All right, Hugh, how are you today?
I'm good. Great to hear from you.
Great to hear from you. I'm glad to have you on the show today. So today we're talking about your band, Breeding Ground, and basically a brief history, well, not a brief history, but a history of how you came into being and how you ended up in Toronto in the late 70s, early 80s, and throughout the 80s as a real mainstay of the club scene downtown in that period of years.
Well, I had formed little cover bands in Ottawa with some friends from my mid to my later teens. John being the vocalist in the very last version of a cover band that we had. And we just got to a point, we had all finished high school, and we were sort of sitting around thinking, well, what are we going to do with the next 10 years of our lives? And we just thought, if we're serious about music, Ottawa's not the place to be. Your avenues are very limited here. And so we knew that Toronto was the closest and the most logical place to move to. So 5 of us got together and we all moved in the same month, not at the same time. And that would be my sound man, Paul Tozer, my lighting guy, who ended up being our manager as well, David Hart.
Oh, Dave Hart. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. John, of course, my longtime good friend, John Sheriff, the singer, who lived 2 doors from me in Ottawa.
Is that how you met? Like you were sort of childhood friends?
Oh, John and I've known John since I've been 5 years old.
Oh, okay. So you guys go way back.
His family lived 2 doors from where my family moved into this big old brick home.
Okay.
And John and his family were already settled there. His mother was actually born in that house. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they go back.
So, yeah. So I've known John since we moved 1963. I guess I first met John the summer of 1963. And I didn't spend a lot of time with him as a child, but in our teens, we certainly became better friends.
Yeah. Did you have similar interests in music and influences?
I think that's probably why our friendship grew stronger because, after public school, John had gone to a different public school than I had, but we went to the same high school. And I don't remember exactly how we started to hang out together, but our musical interests, they dissected at a point. Pretty similar, actually.
Yeah.
And we just sort of, we had a similar taste in what we liked.
And I should point out that John became the vocalist for the band for Breeding Ground.
Yeah, actually, John was a vocalist in the last cover band I had together in Ottawa, and I convinced him to come down and try out for it. Some guys who did not move to Toronto and I had this little cover band together, and we needed a vocalist. And John was really into music then. Oh, geez, he must have been about probably 16 or so, 17.
Okay.
And I convinced him to come down and try out. He was not too sure about it. he was quite nervous about it, actually. But I just told him, look, John, these guys are really cool. They're really laid back. You got no worries. Just come down and do it. It'll be fine. So he did. And with John, a lot of it's his personality and his stage presence. But the audition was great, and the guys really liked him. So for I don't know how long, up to a year, I guess we were in this final version of a cover band in Ottawa.
Yeah.
But that we were in our mid to late teens, so we'd play community centers and church basements.
I mean, that's how most people start out in terms of, they really do. I mean, when you're starting out with a band.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And it's funny you should mention that. Did he lack a bit of confidence? Is that what it was? Because when he's on stage, it doesn't appear to be that way at all.
Oh no, he's got lots of confidence, which makes him a great front man, because you have to be.
Okay.
You have to have that confidence. But it was just he had never done that before. He did take vocal music in high school. I don't know for how long, a year or two maybe. But that that's in a class setting with a bunch of with a bunch of other students. But he had never done something like this before, and so it was really, he was in the sort of spotlight.
So you guys get together. I mean, as you're growing up, you decide. So how did you pull it all together?
Well, after we moved to Toronto, we sort of continued on where we left off, actually, with the cover band stuff. Although we had to get a drummer in Toronto. We went through a few of them, actually. And we sort of just continued playing the stuff we were doing in Ottawa. And Jonathan Strayer, who we had started to get to know late in high school. He went to the same high school as John and I did, and David Hart and Paul Tozer. We were all in the same high school. And Jonathan finished, and he knew that we had all moved to Toronto, and he had gone to Kingston to go to Queen's University. His parents really wanted him to do something productive with his life. He went to Kingston, and within, I think it was by Christmas. Wait a second. We moved in May. So he was calling us, asking us how it was going, and if we had possibly had room for him in this house that we had rented, this huge house out in West Toronto on Dovercourt Street.
Yeah.
And we didn't really, it was a 5-bedroom house, and there were 5 of us in it. But we said, we can probably put you in somewhere. And he said he would make a room in the basement if we would let him come. And we said, well, absolutely, for sure. And Jonathan had picked up the bass and had taught himself to play the bass in his late teens as well in Ottawa. So I think he was just intrigued that we had all taken this step and we were serious enough about music. That we had gone through with this move to the big city.
Yeah, it's quite for a bunch of young guys, it's quite a drastic move.
I guess so.
I mean, in some ways, you're leaving the security of your homes and stuff, and just wholeheartedly like moving down to the big city, a place that you're not familiar with. And none of us had lived outside of our family homes, so it was our first move out of home, and we moved to Toronto. And wow.
And I think Jonathan was just he was really curious about what we were doing, and so he came down. And anyway, so we sort of continued this cover band thing.
Sorry, I should mention he's your bass player, right?
Yeah. He was the first bass player. The first 5 years, which I call phase 1 of Breeding Ground, the original Breeding Ground, was Jonathan, myself, and we went through 3 drummers, which I'll get to later. Jonathan moved in, and he moved into the basement. It was dark and damp down there, but he didn't seem to mind one bit. He moved right in, and he was actually a very big influence on the direction we took. musically.
How so?
He was before he left Ottawa, he was getting into the Clash, and he was really into the Sex Pistols. And that was all winding down, of course, by the time we all got to Toronto. But he didn't quite come from the same musical background as John and I did, but pretty close, close enough that we could mend something. So anyway, he got me and John listening to. I can remember the Clash, especially. He got me into, and I just loved it. I can't remember the other bands that got me into, but it was just that whole scene, that whole new scene, and it was changing at the time. It was changing to the British new wave invasion.
I know it all too well because a friend of mine back in 76 or 77, he went back to England because that's where his parents were from. And he brought back this single, this 45, and he threw it on the turntable. And the moment I heard it, it's almost one of those, those life-changing experiences, right, in the sense that you could see that it was a cultural force, a subcultural force that was making an impact on me already.
Yeah.
And the next day I kind of cut my hair short and just started wearing torn T-shirts and stuff like that. It was very strange.
Safety pins through your nose?
No. I didn't quite go that far.
Just kidding.
I would have if I could, but I didn't quite go that far because, you get beaten up in those days if you started looking like that on the street, right? Especially where I live.
Okay.
Anyway, so carry on.
Okay. So, So Jonathan was a big influence on us. So we were starting to listen to other music, and we played a few shows as a cover band. We actually warmed up for Blue Peter. Chris Swardman, I can't remember how the contact was made, but he took an interest in us, and we got a warm-up gig with Blue Peter at, I think that was at the Horseshoe, actually. I can go look in my notes because I've got all the shows. I recorded all the shows we played.
Oh, that's great. Now, Chris Swardman was who?
Chris Swardman plays guitar, and he's the chief writer in Blue Peter.
Okay, right.
Yeah, he took a shine to us. I kind of think it was mostly John's presence and vocals, because John was a little bit like Paul Humphreys, sort of the same vein of vocals, but John was much more dramatic.
Yeah,
which really worked for us. Anyway, so we played a few warm-up gigs as this cover band. I can't even remember what tunes we would have done. Maybe some Elvis Costello at that point, but probably still some Bowie and who knows, some Aerosmith. That's the kind of stuff we, John and I, had been doing in Ottawa. But we came to a quick conclusion that because we had started to go to clubs in Toronto, the Queen Street West specifically, it quickly occurred to us that we weren't going to go very far in this big city being a cover band. I mean, you can do the hotel thing and all that, but that was not what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We were frequenting the nightclubs and seeing some great acts, and just it was at that point, it was that scene on Queen Street was getting very vibrant, and I think it was changing.
It definitely was. I can tell you that to my knowledge, from what I could tell, because I used to go down there every now and then, that was just sort of starting in the mid-'70s and onwards. I can tell you that was the center of innovation as far as the Toronto music scene was concerned, because outside of that, and I guess it must have been like that in Ottawa, any club that you went to, a rock and roll club, 9 times out of 10, the band you were watching were cover bands.
Oh, yeah. And here, there was only one punk club that I remember and that we played at actually once before we left. But yeah, it was all... Here, Ottawa's very country blues based, but the rock bands they were all sort of pretty typical.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember seeing. I mean, I lived in the suburbs until that, for most of that time, and I remember I saw Platinum Blonde. They were doing covers of Police tunes.
Right. Oh,
that was before they really took off. Right, the Tony's Rock and Roll West, but right across from York University.
Oh boy.
But yeah, so. Anyway, so you saw that there was a lot of innovation going on.
Yeah, we needed a new direction. We knew we weren't going to go anywhere being a cover band in Toronto. And I specifically remember going to, because that night stands out in my mind really, really distinctly. And we went to, because Paul Tozer had gotten to know this band called Kinetic Ideals, and then gotten to know the singer quite well and really liked them, and said to John and I, and he said, you guys should come and see this band. They're called Kinetic Ideals, and they're playing at this club called The Drake. It's in the basement of an old hotel on Queen Street West. So we went. I remember Jonathan and John and I went. We were standing at the back. The place was pretty packed. I was impressed. And this band was playing, and their sound was just, it was, the only way I can think of describing it is an angular sort of, I'd hate to say new wave, because back then it wasn't even a term back then. It was just sort of an attitude and a writing style I hadn't heard before, and I was really impressed with it. And I turned to John. I think I remember turning to Jonathan. I said, I looked at him. I said, "This is what we should do. This is the kind of stuff we should write." And he agreed with me. And so it was kind of, I think it was kind of from that point on that we decided, that we could take a new approach to writing.
year was that?
Late 79, maybe. When I look at the dates we played it, I think it was March 1980 that we went to see them.
So you got things going right out. You decided that things were going to change, right? Pretty rapidly.
Well, we just liked what we were hearing in Toronto, especially that strip along Queen Street West, and just the bands.
Speaking of which bands did you see?
That's a good question.
Probably many that we've heard of.
I distinctly remember Johnny and the G-Rays too. They were a little different sounding. They were, but we really appreciated what they were doing too. Just really good writing, and we got to know Johnny quite well. Actually, rented a rehearsal space from him for a short while before we got our warehouse. Who else would we have seen down there?
I remember seeing the Diodes, I think.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you did. I remember seeing the Battered Wives in a club there.
They played at my high school with Triumph.
Did they?
They played at my high school with Triumph. Can you imagine that lineup?
Triumph.
I mean, they basically like booed off the stage. Oh, I just thought they were great. That guitar player was fantastic.
Yeah. I would have left during Triumph, I think.
Yeah, probably me too. I tried to, but I was selling anyway. Okay, so carry on.
I get lost very easily.
Sorry, it's me. I keep interjecting. It's like a trip down memory lane here because I was there too.
Yeah.
You were at the club. It was Kinetic Ideals.
Right, Kinetic Ideals, Johnny and the G-Rays. The Battered Wives were really big then. That album of theirs was super. Oh, that first album of theirs.
They were fantastic.
They were really good. I'm just a casual friend now of Toby Swan's on Facebook.
And very tight too. They're a really tight band.
Oh, really tight. And I mentioned to him that I distinctly remembered seeing them, and I think it was the Horseshoe. I'm not sure though. And during one of his lead solos, he jumped off the stage and he leapt in the air and landed on his back on the table that we were all sitting at, knocked over our beers, and was playing a lead break. And I don't know why he picked our table, and I reminded him of that right after he friended me on Facebook, or he accepted my friendship. And his reply was, "Oh no, that couldn't have been me." And then I said, "Oh yeah, it was you." And he says, "Okay, I guess maybe it was." And I said, "Oh, it was definitely you, Toby." And I said, "I distinctly remember." But there was one other band that influenced us, and it was the band that Laurie Yates sang in. It was kind of a country rock band. The Last Resorts. The name just came to me. I don't know how, but it just came to me. The Last Resorts. And
I remember
Laurie. Yeah. Laurie had a great voice, and she liked us. We liked her. And Stan Demonsky was the guitarist.
Did they play the Cameron a lot?
Yes, and they also played the Cabana Room, which is where we first started, upstairs in the Cabana Room.
Okay, that was your first big gig, was it?
Yeah, well, our first little gig.
Yeah,
it was upstairs, and we warmed up for another little band. It was playing called Men of Song. So we got to know Men of Song, and Chroma Key, I think, was playing at that point too. You know, Soma and Ted.
Oh, okay.
And they had come from Ottawa as well.
Right. And what was their take? Was that a bit more sort of performative?
It was kind of a mix between sort of Grace Jones and it was a bit angular. Ted's writing was Ted had come from a big punk band in Ottawa, probably the biggest that we had here, called The Action. And they were really big here, and that band had folded up at the end of the 70s. Well, there was a small group of bands, that we would go out and see. And
so, what I'm interested in now in hearing is how did your process change? I mean, can you explain how your process began before this? You suddenly had this epiphany, and what it became afterwards. How your writing style changed, how the direction of the music changed, and in what way?
Well, the cover band, we weren't writing at all. I would put on a record, and everyone would learn the parts.
Just copy it.
Yeah. And you learn it, and that's how I taught myself how to play guitar, actually, in my young to mid-teens, I would play records over and over and over and over and over until I figured out what the guitarist was doing. When we decided we had to write our own stuff, well, it's a whole different approach. Don't like to call it jamming, but usually Jonathan, John, and I would sit around and just playing around. And if someone came up with an interesting idea, we would work with it. And it was often Jonathan. It was sometimes me. And John would usually just sit and listen to what we were doing, and he'd be working on lyrics.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain where the ideas come from. And we weren't, we weren't copying anybody. We was all sort of just coming out of us. And at that point, we weren't terribly influenced by what was the British invasion yet. The Cure, the Susie, all those bands. They were just sort of coming into Toronto as well, and it's hard to explain where the music came from.
It was definitely. I mean, there's definitely a sound that comes out of that period and that kind of those bands. Whoever they were, even if it was just sort of straightforward rock and roll, it was different. It sounded different. The phrasing was different. Everything was different about it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was new and fresh sounding, and it was what punk sort of morphed into.
Yeah,
and it was. I was not heavily into punk. I was kind of. I might have been a little bit young for it, but also living in Ottawa, you're pretty sheltered here from what's going on in the world music scene. So moving to Toronto, that. We realized it when we got to Toronto how open and how worldly the music scene was. I mean, and that was great. It was absolutely great. It was the best.
Yeah.
It was the best thing we could have done. So anyway, the writing came from little ideas we'd have, and we'd just sort of work on them and write parts and mesh it all together somehow. And some songs would come together really quickly, and some songs would take literally months. And I can think of two examples. Happy Now I Know took about 15 minutes.
Wow.
Epic took about 2 months, 2 or 3 months. But that's typical.
place at, was this all taking place at the house on Dovercourt?
No, at the end of the first year there, we all sort of split up. A couple of guys wanted their own places, so we kind of gave up that house.
Yeah.
John and I shared a few apartments before we moved into another house up in East York, right on Eglinton Avenue, just past the big high school there at Bayview.
Yeah.
We rented this great little house. It was a really white neighborhood, and we thought, well, we're not going to go over too well here. Just our looks, we knew we weren't going to fit in very well, but we were nice guys. So the neighbors were friendly to us, and we were likewise. We were friendly to them. But it was the basement of that house that we formed the band.
Oh, okay.
We had there was kind of a little rec room down there that was empty. It was a paneled room, and it was just big enough to get a drum set in and a couple of amps, and a couple of speakers for a small PA and a microphone for John. I can remember being in that room up until like 4 a.m, and Jonathan and I were working on ideas, and there might have been a little alcohol involved.
Yeah, this usually is.
Oh, probably. Who knows what else? I won't go into it.
Substance abuse wasn't passive.
No, and sometimes, often it helped. Yeah. Sort of open the mind.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Let the creative juices flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that house was really the birth of the band. I think we were there for at least 2 years, maybe 3 years.
So that for kind of that house sort of it gave form to all your ideas. Is that where you came up with your set at the beginning of the first set kind of thing? Was that?
Oh yeah. And when we had about 6 songs semi-finished and maybe not
complete.
No, they were complete. They just weren't in any sort of form of perfection. But Jonathan and John sort of both said to me, they said, we could do a warm-up gig now. We've got enough songs we could do a warm-up gig. I said, we've only got half a dozen songs. And they said, that's enough.
Yeah.
David took on being our sort of booking manager, and he got us, for the first 3 years, actually, he and Paul Tozer did a lot of work with us. They were our sound, lighting, and management. So we opened up for, actually, we didn't open up for all that many bands before we started getting our own gigs. We opened up for Men of Song. We opened up for Chroma Key.
Okay.
I think we did one more show with Blue Peter. And I remember the first few shows we played, we didn't even have a name for the band yet. Those would have been the Cabana Room shows and maybe the Queen City Tavern.
So it was mainly across the Queen Street Strip then?
Oh, yeah.
The Queen West Strip, yeah.
Yeah. That's certainly where we laid our foundation.
Yeah.
So once we left the house in East York, we all sort of got our own places after that. There were 3 or 4 of us living in that house. Some friends would come and go. But basically, it was John and I that were on the lease of that house, and we sort of controlled it. But once we split up from that house and we went on our own, we needed a rehearsal space. So if my memory serves me right, the first place we rented was from Johnny McLeod, and that is on, I think it's St. Patrick, just half a block up from Queen Street. He owns, and I think he still owns it, this building there it's just great. It's just so bland. You could walk right by it and not even see it. He rented us a space in there for a while until we found our own rehearsal space, which we finally did. And the rehearsal space we found was a really old warehouse at River, just north of Queen.
Right. I was there once, I think.
Yes, I think so.
Now, we must remind our listeners that in those days, a lot of Queen Street, especially Queen Street West, was still very industrial. It was the center of the garment industry in Toronto, even though that was fading away, but it was still pretty industrial.
Oh, yeah. And Queen Street East was pretty barren. How would you describe Queen Street East? Like,
It always reminded me of sections that were basically in between some residential and then little shops and restaurants and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, and then Logan and places like that, all along Girard, and was all industrial, and Eastern Avenue.
Yeah, yeah, and not very popular. The people that would shop would stick to Yonge Street and Queen Street, that first section of Queen Street West,
Yeah.
where there were shops. But Queen Street East, there was not much out there at all. Anyway, so yeah, we got this great warehouse. We first moved into the second floor, which I remember we went in and it was full of these huge, tall shelves, and it was all film canisters. And I think it was National Film Board was storing a lot of their film there, and we had a little section of that floor just beyond all the shelving. That didn't last very long. We got offered a space on the floor above and a much bigger space, which we hopped on right away. It was great.
And that was what? Was that the one at
River Street? Yeah, right beside the Humane Society there. That became the breeding ground base.
was like Breeding Ground Central.
Well, it was just a really rundown warehouse, and we had to supply our own heat. It was just brick walls and wooden ceiling. There was nothing. There was an artist that lived in the other part of the building. This is really interesting. We got to know him quite well. His name is Thaddeus Zapelowitz, I think is.
Sounds very familiar. Anyway, go ahead.
And he is an artist. He does. He had a big shop in there. It was pretty fascinating. Now that I think about it, he had this open space that was 2 floors. 1, 2. Actually, he had 3 floors in this section of the warehouse, and this one section had part of the floor cut out, and he used it as his workshop. And he did metal casting, and he actually lived in the very top penthouse, which was all above this, in this warehouse. And I mean, there was nobody else around. He lived up there. So we got to know him quite well because, of course, we were just sort of a walk away from his workshop. And so we got to know him quite well.
So you're around a lot of creative people.
Yeah. He ended up hosting a couple of speakeasies there that we played at, which were pretty cool. And we did those with Altamoda and Molly Johnson.
Is that how you met her? Or?
No, Molly's a whole nother story. We actually met her here in Ottawa. She went to our high school for a year.
Oh, okay.
And that's where we first met her. And didn't run in and ran into her again the first year we were in Toronto. We were on Church Street, I believe it is. Remember a little a place called the Purple Onion?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. Actually, one of my first girlfriends, who was much older than me, a go-go dancer in the Purple Onion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back in the early 70s, I believe. I can't remember. Late 60s, early 70s.
Cool, Faisal. I wish I could claim the same thing or something similar. But yeah, we were walking by there one day. I don't even know why we were over in that part of town, except that John and I lived, we had shared an apartment over in that area on Linden Street. I think that's why we were walking over there. Anyway, Molly Johnson just happened to be there. I don't know if she was coming in or going into the Purple Onion, but we met her right in front of it. And we had a great conversation, and that's sort of where we...
a sort of reunion.
That's where we reunited with her and stayed in contact with... We told her, what we were doing in Toronto. We had this little band together, and she was very interested, as she always is, and very supportive of anything in the arts in Toronto.
Yeah.
She's magnificent that way.
I remember she was hanging out on Queen, and she was very much part of the scene down there at the Cameron, right? At the Cameron House.
Oh, yeah. She lived in the Cameron House for a few years.
Yeah.
She had 2 different rooms there that I know of, and that's when we knew her well.
Yeah.
We used to go to... She used to do the Blue Mondays. Were you ever at one of those?
I may have been, Hugh, but I can't even remember. I got to say, a lot of that stuff is kind of a little foggy, but anyway.
Yeah, I understand.
If you know what I mean.
I understand completely. And most of it's quite foggy to me. But Molly used to have this thing called Blue Monday, and it was in the little back room at the Cameron House on the first floor.
Yes, I was there.
Oh, you were?
Yep.
Okay. And she would do all these old jazz and blues numbers with who played guitar with her was Gordy Johnson from Big Sugar.
Yes, okay.
And he was just this shy little guy, and I was kind of fascinated with this playing because he was doing all this jazzy stuff, which he was playing all these chords, which I didn't have any idea what he was playing. And he had Molly had Aaron Davis playing piano as well back there. And sometimes stand-up bass player, which was probably David Pilch. Anyway, it was just a really unique night that we would always go to because it was so different from what else was going on the Queen Street West crowd. And and we loved Molly, and we loved her singing voice.
Yeah.
And she was doing Altamoda at that time, sort of the poppy funk band. But she would do this every Monday night, and it was just the only word I can describe it is cool. It was just really laid back and really cool.
Nice place to hang out.
It was a great place, and she really introduced a lot of the punks on Queen Street West to all that old jazz stuff, which was a real ear and eye opener.
Yeah.
For a lot of us. So she, that multi-talented Molly Johnson, she's something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I always categorize jazz musicians as real musicians. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, I'm way above my grade.
I'm way above my skills as well.
Especially to listen to me go, how do they do that? Why can't I do that? So now, where were we? We were at River Street, the rehearsal space. So you played your first small gig at the Cabana Room. And then how did things sort of evolve from there? Was it Dave Hart that was getting you regular gigs, or were you just, we were all over the place?
Yeah, David would often drop in when we were rehearsing. I think he just sort of wanted to stay in touch with us on what we were doing.
Yeah.
I don't think he necessarily understood what we were doing, but it didn't matter to him because David's very, very much a business guy, and but he did do our lighting for the first 2, maybe 3 years. He had bought a lighting system here in Ottawa, which he packed up and took to Toronto with him and stored there somewhere. But he had all these park cans and a lighting board, and he would do our lighting, and he was actually very good at it. It was very dramatic lighting, so it worked with the band, and we were fairly dramatic, I guess. So we would play those, little clubs. Queen Street Tavern, which is a club that some people will recognize the name of. It was, the front of it was a strip club. It was a really funny little place. It sort of had a storefront. It had windows in the front, like a storefront, but it was a strip club. There was a little back room in that place that we used to play in, and the girls would dance out front, and they'd take a break, and we'd play in the back room, and we actually got to know some of them. They were all really sweet girls, but that place didn't last very long. But it was certainly one of the very first clubs we played at, besides the Cabana Room.
So you were saying that you were very dramatic. Can you describe what that means? Because it sounds like you'd become very performative. You started to figure out your stage presence and your style. How did that evolve?
Yeah, we were certainly developing a style. Dramatic. The music was dramatic, and John's presence and his staging, he sort of melded right into it. So some people would call us goth or cold wave, and I guess I hate terms like that, but
I know, but I know what you mean.
Yeah, in the beginning we were pretty loud and it was pretty powerful. I've got this recording of us playing in a club here in Ottawa that my brother recorded on video, and we were playing. A radio station had a night here. It was a whole bunch of punk bands from Ottawa, which was kind of late for punk bands in Ottawa. And they had us. We were sort of the headliners because they'd heard about us. So we came from Toronto and we played. And I've met a guy that played in one of the bands before. He lives in Kingston now, and he told me he remembers that show so well. He said we were all bopping, and when we were doing our punk stuff and playing these little 3-minute songs, he says, and then you guys came on, and he said, it's just sort of like this wall of sound. And he said, everyone just sort of stood back. He said, you guys were so different from what was going on here. And he said, we were just sort of blown away by it all. But it was very, I would say a lot of it was quite aggressive. The writing was quite aggressive, and a lot of minor chords, I guess. Sort of the beats were very sort of jungle-like, sort of the Slits sort of stuff.
So you had a strong drummer too, I guess, huh?
Yeah, Ken Jones was our original drummer. I think he enjoyed the whole thing. It was a whole new experience for him too, but it was a new experience for all of us. Yeah. But I guess that's how I would describe it. It was very aggressive. We were quite loud, and I think we just sort of hit people over the head when we come out and play.
Which is kind of the way goth really started out. It wasn't that, sort of, it was kind of like that to begin with. I remember the early goth bands being really like, right up front, very loud, and it was just the scene, right?
Oh yeah. When I listened to the first Susie and the Banshees album, that album reminds me so much of what we sounded like when not that we were copying, because we didn't copy any of those bands. We barely knew them when we were writing. We started to hear about them eventually, and people would tell us. People would tell us we sounded like Joy Division, and we'd go, "Who's Joy Division?" Like we didn't know. It was sort of weird. I've been thinking about that since you asked me last week. Where did this sound come from? It's so hard to explain it because it didn't. It wasn't influenced by that wave coming in from England so much at first. It was influenced by what all the bands were doing on Queen Street West. That's what I think.
Which is basically, and a lot of people just never give it credit and really don't think about it. It was a scene unto its own, really.
Oh, sure it was.
I mean, they would have like big acts show up every now and then, like the Buzzcocks or Costello at the Elmo, which I saw, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that there was a real scene here. It was, it was legitimate.
Oh, it was. And it was vibrant, and it was really exciting, and that's what propelled us. I think it was the excitement and all the new sounds. It was just a real scene, and there were a bunch of bands that were all doing it. We were all playing the same clubs.
Yeah,
and we'd get to know some of them. The Rent Boys were a huge name along Queen Street West. Vital Signs.
I should add that also it wasn't just a creative era for a creative period for bands. It was just creativity in general. There were artists everywhere, and
for sure. The Cameron House was full of artists, and I think you had to be sort of a working artist to be able to live there.
Yeah,
and another band that comes to mind is the Vital Signs. They were playing around, and they were in the same league, and we were all sort of at the same level, doing basically the same thing for a while, just writing our own tunes and trying to get some recordings done.
That was part one of my very interesting conversation with Hugh Gladish, lead guitarist and co-founder of the band Breeding Ground. Join us next week for part two. So when did things start to open up? When did you start to realize that you were becoming fairly well known and you were getting gigs? How did that kind of evolve?
Well, it would have been between our first EP, which is it was just a self-titled 4-song EP. So join me next week for part two of Fertile Ground or Breeding Ground. Thank you. See you next week. This episode of Channel F was produced and edited by Faisal Sheriff. Assistant editing and research, Lori H. Sound design by Faisal Sheriff. All music provided by Breeding Ground with kind permission from Hugh Gladish. You're listening to Channel F.